Who you were shouldn't interfere with who you are and ultimately who you want to be. And such is the paradoxical and almost oxymoronish nature of the human existence, this thing called life, right? And I want to get into that concept and possibility and talk this thing through and maybe give you some incentive to find a way to move forward, regardless of who you were. I was having a conversation with my wife yesterday. It was gossipy in nature because that's what couples do, especially if, like me, you've been together 25 years, right? So we get into conversing and gossiping about some things we've seen and what it might look like and what we might surmise to be happening based on the evidence that's been in front of us. And I'm not going to get into too much detail out of respect for the conversation and the implications. But let's just say we were discussing another couple and she asked for my opinion on what I might think might be happening. And so I paused for a brief moment, like any man who's been in a relationship and is married, because you ask yourself, is this a setup? And you start to think, yeah, it's a setup, right? Because you know that your answer is less about what you think might be occurring in the gossip, because it really, at the end of it, has nothing to do with you. But your answer is more reflective of what you might be thinking. And what you might be thinking is clearly a reflection of who you are, but also probably because of who she knows you have been. So I paused for effect. I acknowledged the fact that it might be a setup, and I still gave the answer that I thought was the appropriate answer. If for nothing more than that's just who I am now. I can speak my piece and know that some of who I was might interfere or might have interfered with who I am and could be, but I'm confident that it no longer is. And sure enough, I gave the response based on what I thought was happening, my perception, because I'm a man and I gave it a man's perspective. And sure enough, my wife's response was something to the effect of, yep, you know all about that, right? You know all about it because that's who you are too. And I stopped her quick. Nope. Might have been who I was, but it's no longer who I am. And it's that simple and plain. While true, the experiences that brought me to be able to have an opinion, a thought, a possibility about what is and isn't could be indicative of who I had been. It has no longer anything to do with who I am. And it happens that fast. Here's the difficulty, though, about how it could interfere. The fact that it happens fast for me and that I could take everything of who I was not and no longer allow it to interfere with who I am is my change, is my right now, is my truth, which is also, I can't neglect what has happened, but I'm no longer allowing it to interfere. The difference is my environment, which includes my wife because that's my commitment. She needs a little more videotape. She needs a little more proof that everything I was is no longer interfering with who I am and therefore ultimately who I might continue to be. It's the idea and concept of us as people, how we kind of reminisce or even reflect and ponder past, present, future, the here, there, and the space between. It's always only right now. But the evidence we need to support our right now, we usually roll back the videotape instead of creating new videotape, right? And the more that we roll back the videotape, the more we stay and continue to essentially quantify and qualify and affirm our current existence. It's odd, but it's truth that we need to be in our current space in almost an accepted type format. We need to have self-acceptance. And when we have self-acceptance, then we can start to make moves based on what we accept. But the conundrum and the quagmire, back to what my wife provided, is that the environment around us is a constant reminder that who we were can interfere with who we are, and dare I say then, make us feel like an imposter to who we could be. Because who we could be needs to be also who we are, but who we are is wrapped up and tied up and interfered with who we were. And I'll give another example to kind of help it make sense a bit, or at least I think it's making it make sense a bit. In my career, because that's another space that we try to elevate ourselves in to grow. I remember being at the same place for over a decade, and I at some point in between that decade, it was almost quite literally about a handful of years in, I decided to go from mediocre employee who was not really all the way committed to growth and expansion. Like I did my job, but I wasn't clamoring to grow. I just wanted to get paid, and not be bothered. I flipped the script and went to my boss and was like, look, listen, this is not working for me from the perspective of I need more. Now he hears who I am right now and who I think I want to be. The problem is everything I was for that handful of years, how could it not interfere with that statement? It's almost a conflict of interest. So he only sees who I have been, and therefore he can't see who I want to be, and now he's ignoring who I believe I am. But in that minute, when I became ambitious, I became that ambitious dude. There was nothing that was technically incorrect about that because of who I was. I just made a conscious decision that who I was going to be started effective right now. But somebody said something to me because about a good year passed, maybe even a year and a half, and I wasn't seeing any traction. I increased my performance. I was taking it to another level. I was gaining more skills. I felt like I had the knowledge, the skill set, the determination, the capacity, the talent. It was clear that I displayed the ability to be at a higher level, but it wasn't producing the result. And so somewhat of a quasi-mentor, he was somebody I beefed with from time to time. He was actually a really, really older gentleman. I just never got along with him because he kind of had the mafia-style mentality of he had been there for like 2 decades. He was a manager in the space, and he felt like there's a certain level of respect that came by default. And I felt like I was just the younger blood. And not to say that what he did wasn't valuable, ironically, who he was, interfering with who he is and who he continues to possibly be. But it was kind of like we just conflicted. I'll leave it at that. But every now and again, he'd drop a nugget. Maybe he had some respect for me I didn't realize. But I went to him, I kind of went to vent one day, off script. It was never something I did. I think I was by the water cooler. And I guess he could sense my frustration. He's like, yo, Jeff, you good? Like, what's going on? I said, listen, man, I'm trying real hard to grow. I need more money. At that time, my wife was pregnant. So I had a lot of incentive to want more. And he saw that I was grinding. He saw that I had become more visible, more knowledgeable. I was speaking up a bit, taking on more projects, tasks, etc. All the things you think you would do when you want to become. And he said, look, maybe you just need to leave here because they can't see you for who you are because they only know you for who you were. Think about that. They can't see you for who you are essentially because there's conflict between who you always were. And that is a massive and natural inflection point. And that happened to be career-wise, but think about that. I talked about relationally with my wife. Think about that and expand that out into the entirety of your existence. That who you continue to be is reinforced by who you were, and therefore and thereby by default and language, conflicting and interfering with who you believe you might be, which is really who you are if you decide to be it right then and there. And so the reality to kind of close that loop with the business side was I had to take who I was, and what he said was this, to also as I elaborate on the point. When someone knows you for who you were and you present yourself in new form, so think about now there's that conflict between past and present, and then they can't necessarily see the future. But if you take everything you presently are right now, all your new gifts, all your new talents, all your newfound confidence, that new energy, and you take that somewhere else and you walk into the room as that new person, then you're introducing yourself into a new environment, into different people, places, and things as this new higher version. So now thereby when they see you, they're not interfered or conflicted with who you were because they never knew who you were. And someone could give you someone could give that person, whether it's a boss, a different partner, a different environment entirely, community, a different softball team. They could give them your previous resume and they could read off everything that you were, but because they have no visual stimulus or have no recorded history of your past, they might know it, acknowledge, and see it, but it's essentially a blank slate. So you take who you were, become who you are, even if it's a fake it till you make it, because again, it happens that quick. I just am right now, whatever I choose to be. I'm that person that works out. I'm that person who is more committed to my spouse. I'm that person who's more committed to my family. I'm that person who's more committed to my job. I'm that person who's more committed to God. I'm that person who's more committed to the future. I'm more committed to right now. I'm all we are is energy in motion. So my emotion, I'm raising it to a higher level. And if I remove myself from everything that was interfering with who I was, usually the past, inclusive of the environment and the people who are blocking and interfering, not because they really want to, but because that's all they know. And I take that new emotion, that higher emotion, energy, emotion person into a new environment, new career, new everything I just mentioned, as that elevated self, as in even inclusive of if you're watching me right now, you don't know anything about who I was. It's kind of why I wore the fitted today. Aside from the fact to hide my baldness, my wife likes it. I know I look good with the fitted. But in any event, this is part of who I was as I grew up, the environment that was around me. I am from New York. The Yankee fitted, it's a symbol of a lot of things. So that's part of it also, that I can present myself however in the physical form. I could throw on a suit and tie. I still look good. I look good without the hat. It don't matter. It's because it's who I am. But when I present myself to you, all you see becomes all you know, and therefore I am all you see. And now I am what I say I am, which is also how I always am in my videos, right? And so the process of becoming, you have to be able to manipulate almost your environment, your surroundings, everything that has seen you and might be interfering with who you are, because that is presenting a block for you, reinforcing and allowing you to just accept status quo and essentially stagnation in your life. Represent yourself in a different way so that you can be accepted at the higher level. You get what I'm saying? So that the present you is always whoever you are. And the reality to this is part of the past or who you were shouldn't interfere with who you are. It took everything about who you were to become who you are. It took everything about who you were, whether it was tragic, whether it was dark, whether it was demonic, whether it was embarrassing, whether you never want to relive those moments again, whether if you know in your core, if someone was able to look into you and read your life resume and then live the life resume of who you were with you, and it's like, ooh, you did all that? That's who you were? Ooh, that's ugly. Yes, but that doesn't no longer have to be who I am. And demeaning, diminishing, and suppressing, it makes it an inhibiting factor to who you could be by making you who you are instead of leverage. Instead of leverage. The reason why we have resumes, the reason why businesses and maybe even God goes over your resume, although I don't believe he judges you the way that the world will believe, but that's a conversation for a different day. The resume is important to show growth. And when you present your resume to possibly get a better job or expand your future, you don't put down all the dirty deeds you did, but you know that the experience you gained through the dirty deeds, through the failures, through the gossiped version of you, through what you can identify as no longer who you are because it's no longer who you want to be because it might have been who you were, that is leverage. That is wisdom. That is what is required to be who you are. And it shouldn't be dismissed. It shouldn't be put into a space where it is uncomfortable. It's not to say that you can acknowledge as energy in motion, as emotion that, yeah, given another opportunity, of course I wouldn't do that. Of course I wouldn't. Who would subscribe to continuing to repeat a life resume that doesn't show any sort of growth, that is constantly interfering with your potential present, thereby eliminating a more prosperous future? No one would intentionally repeat a past that they knew would interfere with a prosperous future. No one would go and stay into the dark if they didn't know it was to blossom and potentially become more fruitful in the light. No one would want to intentionally suppress their potential in every possibility because of who they were, as if somehow it doesn't make them who they are to allow them to be who they could be. We get stuck in past, present, future, here, there, and the space between. Who you are just needs a little more videotape. Update your life resume. Become who you want to be right now, and never allow who you were to interfere. It's always going to be you. Change your mind, change your life. I am who I say I am. Stay rich.